Hello and welcome to the Advent of Code in Python 2021, day 5. So today the exercise gives us a list of coordinates in this format. We have two values separated by comma, then a small arrow and other two values. This means that every line of the input file is essentially a line, which can be vertical or horizontal when one of the coordinates is the same. For example, in this case, 008 is a diagonal line. In this other case, 9 stays the same as in the second place of the two pair of coordinates. So this is an horizontal vertical line, depending on how we interpret them. And what the first part is asking us to do is to determine how many points are crossed by two lines and count how many points are exactly crossed by at least two lines. So for example, in this case, we have this line, and this point in the middle is of course crossed by two lines in this case. So it's 1 point crossed by at least two lines. Could be also 3, 5, 4, 5, whatever. What we have to do is to count how many points in the whole list are covered by at least two lines or more. Notice that lines can overlap not only in vertical and horizontal, so basically they can cross, but they can also be both horizontal or both vertical and overlap completely, so have multiple points in common. Another thing to notice is that a line, for example, like this, 1, 1, 1, 3, includes the two ends, so 1, 1 and 1, 3 are also part of the line. So let's go directly to the problem. This is the input that I have, is 500 lines, and I already created some boilerplate. I think the first problem we have to solve is to parse the lines. This will be in common to the two parts of the problem, because the input file is always the same. The first part is asking us to completely ignore diagonal lines. So for example, this one, 0088, since it has both vertical and horizontal axis as different values, is going in diagonal. So we have to ignore it. We only consider the horizontal vertical ones. Presumably in the part 2 we'll ask something about the diagonal lines. So how do we split this value? How do we parse it? I think the easiest way is to use a regular expression. It's possible to use a function split as we did before, but there are two characters to consider, so this and a comma. And with a regular expression we can do everything in a single step. So I import RE, which is just this Python standard library module for regular expressions. And in the main, because this is the part that is in common between the two solutions, so I want to do it only once, I create a regular expression like this, re.compile. Re.compile simply compiles a regular expression, so it already calculates the essentially an internal representation, the finite state automata to handle it. It's not important how it works, but essentially if you want to use a regular expression multiple times, it's just better to compile it once. And this regular expression will be based on what we do not want to take, so the separator. I can simply say that everything that is not a decimal digit is a separator. So this, for example, \d excluded is a regular expression, which means sorry, wrong character. Which means the R is for regular expression. It's just to make it simpler to write them, so there is no double slash needed here. This means take everything that is not a decimal, and this is compiled and it's called R. At this point, I can just apply to split a line. So let's see, for example, how it works. I import re, so I can see the effect already on the fly. I copy this line, so let's say line equal this thing. Then I compile this regular expression, and then I can split the line, so I can say r.split line. No, sorry, re.split r line. This is splitting the line according to the regular expression. I noticed that there are a few empty values. Why? Because I didn't say that I can accept multiple characters that are not numbers as the separator. So basically it's splitting every time it sees a value. If I add this plus, I say that the character can be repeated. This is just a simpler way to do the splitting of this line. So we see now that it's working correctly. And what I do is I go through the whole file and I say that coordinates, or better, this is lines in the sense, this is actually segments. The segments are equal to what? Every line in the file, so I create an empty list. This doesn't even need to be in the file part. I say that for a line in fr, I split the segments, so I do re.split r line. What I get is this list. I want segments to have this list, but I also want it to be transformed into a list of numbers, not strings, because those are strings, of course. Python doesn't know that they are actually numbers. So I can directly convert them on the fly into segments. So I say the segment is equal to this thing, and I convert the segment into a tuple, even better, where I want int of the coordinate for every coordinate in what was it, segment. We can easily test it because I can simply run this code. Segment, as you see, is a list of strings, and this code will give me the values. There is an error here, a typo. So I run it. And that's it. Okay, so part 1 we receive as an input, and also part 2, presumably, the list of segments. So now what do we have to do with this list? We have to calculate how many points overlap. So we want to keep track for every line. For every segment that we see, we want to enumerate all the points that are in that, and then combine all the points that are in every segment to detect which points are in multiple segments. This operation of keeping track of a count for every possible point can be done easily with a dictionary. So part 1, we will receive a list of segments. We'll create a dictionary, which is essentially a dictionary represents this count, so how many times every point is crossed by any segment. We can say crosses, for lack of a better name, is a dictionary. And then we iterate over the segments. A segment is a tuple, so I say that for x1, y1, x2, y2 in segments, because segments is a tuple for elements. I have first of all to check whether this is a diagonal segment or not. So I say that if x1 is different than x2 and the same happens with y, so essentially they're both different, it means that this is diagonal, and I want to ignore it. So I just say that I want to skip diagonal segments. If I'm here, it means it was horizontal or vertical. So I can just iterate over it and get all the values that are in the given segment. So I say for x in range x1, x2, and for y in range y1, y2, I want to measure this value that is crossing the segment. So I say the crosses in x1, sorry, x y. So essentially I'm iterating over all the possible x and y in a single segment. What is this value? Is equal to what I had already in cross x, y plus 1. Here there is a small problem, which is that in Python there isn't an easy way to increase a value and assume that crosses as a 0 as a default. So we have to deal with the case that this value was not in the dictionary. We have default dictionaries, which is a function that essentially creates a dictionary with a fallback value in case something is missing, but we can just say crosses.get, which is equivalent to use the square brackets to access a value, but it also allows us to specify a default value. So I say, okay, crosses is equal to crosses dot get, so get this value, but if you don't find it, you give us 0. So we assume that we have nothing if it's not present. And then increase this by 1. So if I get a value, I just get it and increase it by 1. If I don't get anything, I assume it's 0 and increase it by 1, and whatever I get, I put it back into crosses. Now I only have I have two doubts. The first is what happens when these values are equal. Will Python range give me will not iterate at all, or will it iterate over a single element? I don't know. So let me see easily what happens if I apply the function range with values that are equal. So range is an iterator, so I have to use list to actually see the content that it generates. Range, let's say to 2. It's an empty list, and that's not nice. And this other is also, there's also another thing I want to check, which is what happens if I have values like 1, 5. It's inclusive, so what I want to do is to increase it by 1, because range will not iterate over all the values, but will stop at the last one. Now I should be fine, because range of a single value will give me that value, and range over, for example, 2, 5 will go from 2 to, to 5 included, which is exactly what I want. So this is fine. And now that we have a dictionary that contains for every crossed value, for every cell, how many times it was crossed, I simply have to count. The problem was asking for the amount of points in this dictionary that at least 2 lines overlap. So we have to go through the crosses dictionary, look at the value, and count how many times a value is equal to is greater than 1. So I say crosses dot values, which is the list of the values. I don't care where they are, so I don't actually need the keys, I just need the values. And let's say that I want to get the length of v for v in crosses of values if v is greater than 1, strictly greater than this. This is a generator, so it's essentially just counting this, and that's the solution. So we can run it, and hopefully this will already work. Let's see. Okay, there is an empty line, so I say that if line.strip is equal to an empty line, we want to skip it. So essentially line 501 is ignored. Interesting. Where is the error? At line 22. Let's print it. So print line, print segment. Let's see what happens. Okay, interesting. So we have oh yes, the problem is that we have the a value that is the new line, which is ignored. This is very annoying, but unfortunately that's how Python works. So I just ask when I iterate to ignore. Let's do it here. I simply when I split the line, I say, okay, I want the values actually until the number 4. And this should already solve. Another problem is that now at line 11, I'm trying to get the length of a generator, which is annoying because it's technically possible to just iterate and count how many lines are there, but I have to add the squares to transform it into a list. It's not a problem. Another thing I can do is just to take the sum of 1 for every element. So instead of generating the list and counting them, I just sum how many times we have a value in there. We have an extra value here. And I get the answer, which is 1118. Let's see if this works already. No, that's not the right answer. It's too low. How to debug it? I will say that we have to consider all the cases here. So I think the trickiest part here is to examine what happens when we transform this tuple, these 4 values, into a list of coordinates. This is a bit tricky because we have a few edge cases. I'm quite sure that this part is working because it's trivial, and this part also is trivial, so I'm not worried about it. I'm worried about this part. So let's do something simple, and let's create an helper. So an helper function which will enumerate all the points that are inside the segment. Let's call them cells. So for these points, which are all integers, but I will not write the type int for simplicity, I will do this. So I will yield x and y. This is a generator, so essentially this thing will be something that we can iterate on, and now we can replace this thing with a call to that iterator. So we can say for x, y in enumerate cells for these values, which are x1, y1, x2, y2. Let me see if this is correct. Yes, seems so. We have, of course, a colon and crosses. So this should be equivalent. I'm just moving something around. Okay. And now a thing I can do is simply to print an example. So in fact, I can take the example from the website. For example, this 1113, and check that this is giving me a proper result. So in here, I just do a for x, y in generate, how do we call it? Enumerate cells for these values 1, 1, 1, 3, and I print x, y. This is a very Spartan solution, but it will work. Import sys, and then sys.exit. So I just exit immediately after that. I don't have to worry about anything else. And I see that for these coordinates 1, 1, 1, 3, I get 1, 1, 1, 2, 1, 3, which seems very correct. Let's look at the other example, 9, 7, 7, 7. 9, 7, 7, 7, and I don't get anything. Why? That's very interesting. So it should be absolutely identical because this seems a very symmetrical case. So for x in range, x1, I'm checking. It's very easy in these cases to miss some, to do a typo like copying an x instead of a y, but this seems not the case. We have now a 9777, so Why is it behaving differently? 9777, so it's iterating over x that goes from 9 to 7. Ah, yes, the problem is that range is not going, it's going only in one direction. So essentially, when I run range from 9 to 7, it doesn't give me anything. It doesn't go backward from 9 to 7. This is very annoying. It's a very annoying behavior of range, but it's easy to fix. Range has an extra parameter which allows us to go backward. So if I do list range, let's say 7 to 5, this doesn't give me anything because it's not going backward, but I can add a -1. This allows us to go backward. Again, here the behavior is a bit annoying because I have to increase 1. Okay, but it's very doable. What do I do? Even better, I ignore completely this third parameter and I force them to be in order. So the first value here will not be x1, but the minimum between x1 and x2. And the second value will be the maximum between x1 and x2, which means that whatever is the order in which we get the coordinates, we just iterate from the lowest to the highest. And of course the same happens with epsilon 1 and 2. So we now do y1, y2, y1, y2. So essentially we were ignoring every pair of coordinates that is not in order, which is very annoying. I would like for Python to actually handle this case automatically, but okay. So this is now working, and I think we can just go forward with the solution of our problem. Now we run again. I get a different number, much higher. In fact, it should be around 4 times higher if we have a quite uniform distribution, 7085. And let's see if this time it works. Yes! See you later for part